You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Cyber Health and Hazard Strategies. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben has the story of law enforcement agencies increasingly relying on AI to synthesize digital evidence. I got the story of the Secretary of Commerce pressuring Taiwan over chip manufacturing. And later in the show, my conversation with Sarah Graham from the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative, discussing their work and findings on mythical beasts, diving into the depths of the global spyware market. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. All right, Ben, we got some follow-up this past week.
That's some good follow-up.
It is.
Yeah.
It's from a listener named Kevin, who writes in and says, I got so angry when Ben said that if it doesn't have the consent of all 100, you'd have to jump through a bunch of procedural hoops, which Senate leaders just don't want to do. It's very time-consuming. Kevin says, this confirms what I have said about our House and Senate. Politicians are always putting their energy into winning elections or helping others. Ben, fix this or tell us how. Ben?
I don't have a good answer for you, Kevin, because I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, they enjoy fundraising. A lot of their job is fundraising.
Yeah.
They'll be on the phone all day talking to potential fundraisers, especially if they're running for re-election. You'd think in the Senate that would be a little bit less acute because only a third of the senators are running for re-election in the next 2 years. But these days, election cycles are 6 years. You're already thinking about what the political climate's going to look like in 2030.
Right.
So a lot of that is fundraising. A lot of it is they like to be home with their constituents.
Do they, though, Ben? Do they?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define constituents. They like to be visible in their states and districts.
Right.
And meeting with people who they think can help them achieve their priorities, whatever those are.
That's fair.
But one kind of axiom about Congress is the one thing that can make them move is the smell of jet fumes. If they think like, all right, if we just come up with a deal here, I can leave. That's the one thing that has seemed in the past to inspire them to come up with compromises.
I see. The big motivator is that they might have to stay longer than they had planned in D.C.
Yeah, it is really interesting. It's not like this in state legislatures. Just having followed the Maryland General Assembly, all the members are present for committee hearings for the most part. They're present for floor sessions. They will work through legislation until midnight on some nights. And honestly, legislatures in states function better than the United States Congress. So maybe they're doing something right.
All right. Well, thanks to Kevin for sending in that comment. We do appreciate it. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to consider for the show, you can email us. It's caveat@n2k.com. All right, Ben, let's jump into our stories here. You want to kick things off for us?
Sure. So there's a revolution happening within law enforcement agencies across the country, and that is the use of AI to sift through digital evidence. So there are a number of startups who have provided software to AI companies. There's this Washington Post article we can put in our show notes about Redmond, Washington, which has purchased a software entitled Long Eye, San Francisco startup, go SF, which offers an AI chatbot designed to answer questions about what is inside tranches of digital evidence to help uncover misconnections and incriminating statements. So I guess we'll start with what happens in a non-AI world is there is a giant stack of papers, or if you're lucky, You can utilize, Control F in a giant digital document.
Right.
You're looking for pieces of relevant evidence to your case. So, did this person make a phone call to a criminal suspect? Where were they at this time according to these cell site location information records? What did they say in a recorded conversation? What did they say in a deposition? All of those go into a vast tranche of case files, and it can be very, very time-consuming to read through all of those case files. Sometimes they're hundreds and hundreds of pages. Incidentally, this is the work that's done by a lot of entry-level legal professionals. So if you can't find a job coming out of law school, one thing you'll almost certainly be able to do is temporary document review work, where a law firm will hire you. They have a big case. You look through hundreds, if not thousands of pages of evidence and try and highlight whatever it is that they're looking for.
Sounds fulfilling.
Extremely fulfilling, but you know what? At least it's a job, right?
That's right. There you go. Paying your bills is very fulfilling.
Yeah. I had a temp job out of college, and it was not the most exciting thing in the world, but I could pay the bills.
Sure.
And there's something important about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The change here is that AI is going to start doing a lot of the work. You can instruct the chatbot to say, look through these documents and find X. So find any evidence that this phone number called that phone number, or find anything within these transcripts that might be incriminating in this way. And that will significantly cut down on the amount of time that police departments have to devote to sifting through digital evidence. And that's going to have a couple of really big impacts. The one I talked about, which is probably of lesser importance, is it might not be good for the job market for recent law school grads. I realize that's a niche concern, but certainly something worth noting. The second, I think, more bigger implication is this gives law enforcement powers that they did not have in the past. They were constrained by just the process of sifting through digital evidence. There's only so many resources you can employ, and not every case you're going to be able to actually sift through all thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of papers of evidence. Police departments have a lot of cases. It's not like Law and Order, where for 40 minutes each week, they devote the full force of their entire agency to solve a single crime. It doesn't work like that, especially in higher crime jurisdictions. So prior to AI, they might have had to use man-hours that were just completely inconceivable to review these types of documents. And the same is true for defense attorneys, for that matter. That might no longer be the case, and that, to me, has major Fourth Amendment implications. There's a theory of Fourth Amendment jurisprudence put forward by our man, Mr. Professor Oren Kerr, still invited on this show if you're listening.
Right.
One day we're going to do it. And it's called the equilibrium adjustment theory. Basically, as technology improves for either criminals or law enforcement, the law should or does adapt to restore the same level of Fourth Amendment protection as existed prior to the advent of that technology. So judges are now going to be aware that it's much easier to search through digital evidence than it once was, and that might cause them either explicitly or implicitly to come down on the side of raising standards for law enforcement agencies for them to obtain a warrant. Or for them to carry out some type of operation. I think they see that this will be such an advantage for police departments that in order to maintain the same level of protection, Fourth Amendment protection for criminal suspects, they're going to have to tilt the scales towards the criminal suspects in some way through changing jurisprudence. And we've seen this in a number of different cases. Riley versus California in 2014. When they confronted the case of whether you need a warrant to look through somebody's cell phone upon arrest. Prior to that case, the thinking was, of course, if you're arresting someone for your own safety, you should be able to look at everything that they have on them, make sure that they're not carrying contraband, make sure they're not carrying weapons. But cell phones are different. Cell phones reveal the most intimate aspects of our lives. They contain all of the information that you can possibly imagine without us. So the Supreme Court said, because the technology has changed, our jurisprudence has to change, and now a warrant is required to search the contents of a cell phone. So I think we could see something similar happen in response to the proliferation of AI chatbots in law enforcement agencies.
So I'm reminded of that old, I don't know, I guess it's a chestnut. I have heard law enforcement officers say, if I want to pull you over, all I need to do is follow you long enough and you'll do something.
Yep. Unless you're a pristine driver, which most of us are not.
Right. But, and so they just, bide their time with enough patience, they'll come up with some kind of justification for pulling you over. This reminds me of that in a certain way where what if I have the contents of someone's cell phone and I say to my AI, find something illegal in here?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great example because you can't have law enforcement agents for 24 hours a day surveil individual criminal suspects. It's just not practical.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they could do one, they could do several, they could do a handful of criminal suspects, but there just are limited resources if they wanted to do broad level surveillance of that kind. But here with AI, you could be skipping those steps.
Right.
Now, we're talking about digital evidence, so that's different than following somebody in their car. But as you said, they could just put in a prompt that says, look through these transcripts, look through these documents, look through this person's actions or whatever, and find evidence of a crime. And that process is going to allow you to uncover more criminal activity in a shorter period of time than in a pre-AI world where you would have had to do the legwork of actually reading through hundreds, thousands of pages to find that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it doesn't make a difference in the most high-profile cases where people were going to be combing through that evidence anyway. But when you apply this at scale, it's just going to probably lead to there being more criminal prosecutions because you're going to be able to find more incriminating evidence than you otherwise would have been able to find.
But isn't this the fishing expeditions that our founders feared?
Yes, it is. I mean, this sounds similar to general warrants, and I think it's possible that if we see some case come up in federal court about this, that they would make that analogy, saying that maybe you have to have some type of reasonable suspicion or probable cause to conduct certain AI queries. We're a long way from that happening, but this is sort of a preview of where I see the future going, where you wouldn't be able to query without any suspicion, find me evidence that Dave Bittner committed a crime based on this voluminous document. You might have to say, I'm looking for evidence. I have probable cause to believe that Dave committed espionage.
Right.
And please find evidence that would indicate as such.
I see.
We're a long way from that, but that's kind of what law enforcement has tried to enforce in other contexts, a certain type of particularity. And I think we could see that here.
What do you think it's going to take to get judges up to speed on this? Because I can imagine the defense lawyers throwing all kinds of shade at this. It's hallucinations and, we can't trust the machines, Your Honor.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's going to be a major gift to defense attorneys because it could sow reasonable doubt. AI does hallucinate. There have been high-profile cases of hallucinations in criminal proceedings. So this is something, at least the judges that aren't like 95 years old, this is something that judges are aware of.
Right.
And so I think that would be pretty compelling. I think it's incumbent upon these law enforcement agencies and upon the manufacturers of the software to make it clear that this is not a 100% foolproof system and that there has to be some level of human oversight. So the company that's mentioned in some of these articles, they have a feature where when it spits out the evidence that you're looking for as a result of that chat, it will cite to the place in the document where that evidence exists. So it allows the human to go in and look at that evidence.
Right, and there's the job for your college grad.
Yeah, but you probably don't need as many of those people.
Right.
If AI is doing so much of the work for you.
But you can see the acceleration that this could provide.
Yeah, it could totally accelerate the ability to search these things. And then if it's actually directing you to the evidence itself, then the work of the lawyer is very different than it previously has been. It's let's analyze the raw data here and see if that really is incriminating evidence based on, the 3 years I spent in law school and my however many years of experience.
Yeah.
And that's frankly more valuable analytical work than read through these thousands of pages and see what you can find. It's probably not, as I said, this is something that's might be good for incumbent lawyers who are going to have more interesting work. And that's true for detectives who work in law enforcement agencies. They're going to be able to spend more time solving crimes and less time sifting through digital evidence. And that's good for people who have been there a while. But for entry-level positions, I think that's one place where law enforcement or law firms can start to cut hiring, which is one thing I would be fearful of as a result of this.
It's interesting to me. I think of this as, on its face, you think, well, this is great. We'll be able to solve more crimes more quickly. Police officers will be able to spend more time making their communities safer, rather than the drudgery of, going through all the technicalities and all those sorts of things. And yet, I can also envision the unintended consequences, the societal implications that we've already seen from technology, right? That changes the way law enforcement functions, and we're not always okay with that.
Yeah, I think one of the potential implications, and this is a shot in the dark because I don't know exactly what's going to happen, is there are going to be more crimes that would have never been discovered that are now going to be prosecuted. I think about something like perjury. Somebody makes a statement at a proceeding where they're under oath, and law enforcement or whomever the investigator is wants to prove that this person committed perjury. This is something that would have required a lot of work. You have to go through a voluminous record to see whether somebody said something that contradicted the statement they made under oath, or if there's evidence anywhere that contradicts the statement the person made under oath. And that is going to be a lot easier.
Right. Say, hey, go through every publicly available transcript of anything this person has ever said and see if any of it contradicts this statement.
Right. And some of them can be not innocuous statements, but statements that aren't in and of themselves that incriminating of serious crimes, but you could still go after somebody for perjury. And oftentimes that's a gateway into getting them to cop to other crimes.
Yeah.
Or it's a way to get suspects to cooperate against their co-conspirators. We say, we have you on perjury, so now you need to give us the goods on your co-conspirator, and that will make law enforcement work a little bit easier. So we might uncover evidence of crimes that just would have never been prosecuted in the past. There's still going to be a level of prosecutorial discretion because when you're actually making the case, that's pretty labor-intensive. Going to court is labor-intensive. But maybe people who previously you would have taken to trial, the evidence is going to be so overwhelming against them that they might take a plea deal. So this is just what I could foresee happening.
Yeah.
Who knows? We're still at the very early stages of this. Not that many law enforcement agencies are currently making use of this type of technology. But I do think it's like a pretty good use case of AI, especially if it's confined to a closed universe. Like it's not asking you to scrape the internet to find evidence of that somebody committed a crime. You're putting otherwise or you're putting digital records in whatever AI service you're using, and they're combing through those records.
Right.
So that decreases the chance that you'll see things like hallucinations.
Yeah, all right.
The world is changing, my friends.
It really is. It really is. All right, I tell you what, let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. We'll be right back. AI adoption is exploding, and security teams are under pressure to keep up. That's why the industry is coming together at the DataSec AI Conference, the premier event for cybersecurity data and AI leaders, hosted by data security leader Cyera. Built for the industry, by the industry, this two-day conference is where real-world insights and bold solutions take center stage. DataSec AI 25 is happening November 12th and 13th in Dallas. There's no cost to attend. Just bring your perspective and join the conversation. Register now at datasecai2025.com/cyberwire. And we are back. My story this week comes from the folks over at Ars Technica. I have to say, it strikes me as kind of weird. That's my highly technical,
sophisticated intro there.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So the article is titled "Taiwan Pressured to Move 50% of Chip Production to U.S. or Lose Protection." So the backstory here is that the vast majority of the production of high-tech chips happens in Taiwan. The chips that are in your Apple devices, for example, chances are that those are manufactured in Taiwan. It's one of the things that Taiwan does best and arguably does better than anyone else in the world. This is one of the reasons why Intel is struggling here in the U.S., is that they've been unable to keep up with the advancements that the Taiwan companies have had in chip production.
Right. Which is why we had to purchase a portion of Intel, correct?
Yeah, I'll say we purchased a portion of Intel. Did we purchase it? Was it in exchange for grants or loans? It's all very messy,
we won't
Ben.
Speculate.
It's all very messy. Let's just say the bottom line is the federal government now has a stake in Intel. And so the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, has told his Taiwanese counterparts that he would like to see 50% of chip production move to the U.S. or else. What's the or else?
Quid pro quo here.
Right. What's the or else? The or else is that they could lose the protection of the United States in the event of Chinese aggression.
I mean, these are pretty heavy-handed tactics because presidents of both parties and members of Congress have spent decades being concerned about Taiwan and a potential Chinese attack or invasion.
Right.
We are allies of Taiwan, obviously. There are a lot of politicians. Nancy Pelosi is one of them, who one of the key causes of their career has been the plight of the people of Taiwan.
Mm.
And now we might sacrifice all of that to move 50% of chip production to the United States. It's a very interesting threat, to say the least. I mean, these are tactics that generally you would see in organized crime.
That's why I say it's weird. It just, I mean, am I off base here that elements of this are weird?
I think a signature of Trump policy, which this conforms to, is trying to use leverage in international affairs that we've never tried to use in the past because of customs or because of the potential fear of blowback or just because it was morally wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think now everything we do in international affairs feels more transactional. Like we're trying to extract a price to get something that we want, and we're willing to blow stuff up if the other country doesn't comply with us.
Yeah.
A lot of people really like this. I mean, this is an American first foreign policy.
Right.
You are threatening to undermine the security of Taiwan, something that we've sought to guarantee for a long time in this country. Even President Trump was known as a major China hawk in his first term.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, at least ostensibly, he was not interested in supporting Ukraine is that might be a distraction or it might divert resources from being adversarial towards China. And here we are. So yeah, I just think that this is their way of doing things. It comports with what a lot of his supporters love about him, which is that he's willing to play hardball to protect American economic interests. I think that's true, whatever you think about this from a moral perspective. I'm obviously not a huge fan of this type of blackmail, but I think this does conform to a very consistent philosophy that we've seen in his second term.
It also strikes me, just from a negotiation point of view, as being unrealistic, because my understanding is that it's not like you can just build a factory over here and start manufacturing these things. The amount of expertise, the supply chains, all of the things that go into
the raw materials, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And if it were easy, Intel would already be doing it. And it's not. And so this idea that they can just pick up and shift their production over here to the U.S., I think many people would say is folly. And this article describes it as Herculean, that it's not easy. So again, back to the negotiating tactic, we're asking Taiwan to do something that it probably can't do.
Yeah, it's also like, and this is going to make me sound like the proverbial neoliberal shill, but the current arrangement is kind of good for everyone. Like, it is cheaper to produce these in Taiwan, which means that we can get them cheaper. This is an industry that is powering the Taiwanese economy, which is obviously good for them.
Yeah.
When we've tried to onshore certain things, generally they have become more expensive. Now, there are trade-offs that are involved there. Offshoring has led to the decline of a lot of different jobs, especially in the industrial Midwest, for example, and that's devastated communities. So this isn't an easy call by any stretch of the imagination. The only way it would make sense for us to ruin this financially beneficial relationship is if there really were a national security concern about chips being made overseas. I think there are national security concerns about things that are manufactured in China, which is our political adversary. That was kind of the whole shebang behind this TikTok kerfuffle, is that ByteDance was basically an agent of the adversarial Chinese government, so we had to tread carefully. But Taiwan is an ally. They are a democratic, small d democratic ally. It's an ally that we've pledged to support. So in that sense, it doesn't make that much sense to me.
Suppose we pull back our support for Taiwan. What are the possibilities of them looking toward, say, the European Union for protection?
I think the possibilities are quite high. They will turn not just to the European Union, but for other emerging countries, perhaps even some in Southeast Asia. I think there are markets out there. Obviously, they take a big hit. The U.S. is a huge market. They're a huge buyer, but there are alternatives out there. And if it turns out that Taiwan is insulted by this type of quid pro quo, that they don't comply with the demands of this negotiation, but they do decide that they want to have a more adversarial relationship with the United States, then it's kind of a lose-lose. Like, they might decide, okay, we'll replace your market share with European Union countries. They're going to guarantee our security, and you are not going to onshore production of chips in the United States anyway.
Right.
So that's kind of the worst-case scenario of them calling our bluff. I think the Trump administration is convinced that they are reliant enough on not just our security protections, that those can't be replicated by European Union countries, and the same thing is true for the market for these types of chips.
I'm just imagining, Tim Cook at Apple looking at all this and thinking, oof.
Yeah, he's keeping his mouth shut, though. I mean,
we don't want to go. Yeah, he's thinking we don't want to go back to Intel, but. Yeah, interesting times.
I mean, he has some very expensive jewelry that he'd like to give to the White House to influence policy. So,
That's right.
Sorry, Tim Cook, if you're listening, I still love you.
A solid gold Apple Watch.
Yep.
All right, we will have a link to that story in the show notes. We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. think your certificate security is covered? By March 2026, TLS certificate lifespans will be cut in half, meaning double today's renewals. And in 2029, certificates will expire every 47 days, demanding between 8 and 12 times the renewal volume. That's exponential complexity, operational workload, and risk. Unless you modernize your strategy. CyberArk, proven in identity security, is your partner in certificate security. CyberArk simplifies lifecycle management with visibility, automation, and control at scale. Master the 47-day shift with CyberArk. Scan for vulnerabilities, streamline operations, scale security. Visit cyberark.com/47day. That's cyberark.com/47day. Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Sarah Graham from the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative, and we're discussing their work on a publication they recently released. It's called Mythical Beasts, Diving into the Depths of the Global Spyware Market. Here's my conversation with Sarah Graham.
So spyware can be defined in a few different ways, but in our report, and this second published report we have here, we take a relatively narrow scope to how we're defining spyware as a type of malicious software that enables the unauthorized remote access of a target device for the purposes of intrusion and surveillance. And so oftentimes folks will ask us, why isn't the scope broader? Or did you include something like stalkerware or ad tech? And we really keep a relatively narrow definition here, focused on that unauthorized remote access specifically for the purposes of surveillance.
Well, can you paint a picture of this market for us here? I mean, who are the key players and how do they tend to operate?
Sure. So in terms of the marketplace, in recent years, there's been a lot of great reporting by different organizations, including Citizen Lab and Amnesty Tech, about the harms coming out of the spyware industry. But in contrast, there's been a relative lack of transparency about what's happening within the marketplace. We oftentimes see headlines about big players such as the NSO group, but there's a lot of other players, small, medium-sized, and more than just vendors. So our report is really trying to look at the marketplace as a whole and understand the supply chain of different vendors, holding companies, investors, and the like across the marketplace at a global scale.
Well, who are some of the key players here?
Yeah. So in our report, we really take a look at the global scale of the spyware market, but hone in on a few particular areas of interest. On first turn, one of our major trends that we identified in the original report and see holding consistent with data from this past year are that the majority of identified entities are domiciled in Israel, India, and Italy. But something I really want to point out, and we see as a trend emerging in this updated data set, is that there's been a significant increase within our sample of US-based investors that continue to disproportionately fund capabilities. And really, we want to highlight this because it really undermines the important US government action that we've seen in the past 18 months to 2 years on spyware, in contrast with the investors from the US who continue to invest in these types of technologies.
Yeah, can we dig into that a little bit? What insights can you provide as to what's driving that market investment from the US?
So to start with a bit of data, we see with the data from this past year, a total of 31 total US investors that we were able to identify. And this we find is particularly remarkable given that some of the entities that US investors are investing in are actually listed on the US entity list. So for example, Candiru listed on the entity list, has investment from US firms, including Integrity Partners, as well as a few other venture capital firms and pension funds coming out of different states. So we're seeing that there's investment from a wide range of investors into a wide range of different spyware vendors, not only including Candiru, but Cognate and a few others as well. And to your question of what's really driving this, our data doesn't necessarily answer that question, but something that my fantastic co-author Jen Roberts continues to point out as we've dug into this data is there has to be a reason. Investors invest when they see the potential for profit. Despite US policy actions such as the entity list, there obviously must be some expectation that there is a future profit to be had here.
Yeah. Well, help us understand how these commercial spyware vendors differ from traditional state intelligence operations.
One thing that we get asked about quite a bit is how do these spywares differ and how are they useful to governments for national security? And there's a strong sense that there's some political will to put controls on these technologies, despite the fact that they are used for permissioned uses in state national security operations. But there is interest to preserve that limited use, and the ability to do so really hinges on these sorts of transparency efforts with data sets like the ones that we've created here to ensure and maintain the integrity of those capabilities for those narrowly defined and permissioned use cases.
Well, one of the things you uncover in the report here digs into the government's role, both as buyers and regulators of this.
Sure. So the state plays a different role in different jurisdictions here. And so I can give you a few examples. As I mentioned at the start, what we do observe and see consistent is that 3 jurisdictions, in particular India, Italy, and Israel, have a lot of activity within their boundaries. And what is something that we see is consistent amongst these 3 is that it's a relatively permissive environment with some sort of state involvement. This varies. We see in the Indian cluster that this is most common in the sort of hack for hire market. In Italy, there's a much older history of spyware with quite a bit of overlap with state entities, whether that's as buyers, but also as regulators, which, as you can imagine, can oftentimes create some either implicit or explicit conflicts of interest and can really make transparency efforts and ultimately any meaningful regulation quite challenging.
Why is it so difficult to hold these spyware companies accountable? I mean, is it as simple as the fact that they're offshore from our own local regulators?
It's a $1 million question. I think a lot of people would like to know the answer to this. One, I can point out to a few things. One trend that we see in all of our reporting has been this feature of shifting vendor identities. So that might be really subtle name changes or total rebrands of different entities that make it really difficult to track consistency in their activity. These entities have a lot of smart folks involved. And so strategic jurisdictional hopping is something that they certainly partake in. And we see this in a few different examples. For example, we know from a court case that Quadream established a presence in Cyprus to avoid European export controls. And so, as you can imagine, this sort of limited ability to consistently track is a huge barrier. And that actually highlights one of our second key trends in this report around the role of resellers and brokers, which I'd be happy to talk about a bit more too.
Well, yeah, let's dig into it. What can you share about that?
Yeah, what we find with our updated data sample is a large number of what we're calling resellers and brokers. These are sort of partners within the marketplace that can be unrelated to the development of spyware, but they contribute some sort of technical or business need for the vendor. So this could be something like marketing services, the provision of telecommunications intercept devices, or creating access to some sort of regional market that an original vendor might not have otherwise been able to easily enter and sell to interested buyers. And so through access to public data sources, we've been able to identify a larger share of these entities and have come to identify more and more that in this expanded and opaque marketplace, these types of intermediary entities are playing a pretty crucial role to limiting transparency.
Hmm. Yeah, can we talk about that? I mean, one of the things that it strikes me is that these spyware companies give a lot of nation states plausible deniability, right? I mean, to what degree is that an element here?
Certainly. There's plausible deniability sort of up and down the supply chain. You could imagine all the way through at the end use of surveillance, plausible deniability in terms of how particular information is gained. But there's also plausible deniability upwards on the supply chain. And I think these brokers and resellers play a really crucial role to that, whether it's mere overlap only of business officers, or whether that's some sort of larger overlap between, for example, the original vendor and setting up some sort of satellite office in another state to gain access to that market. Some examples that we really dug into in the report are around the Mexican spyware ecosystem, and with some recent transparency reporting, we've been able to see how there were layers and layers of plausible deniability through the creation of contracts that only very subtly indicate perhaps that these technologies were being sold to different state agencies.
How hard was it to put together this report? You and your co-author, what are some of the challenges that you faced in gathering and assembling this information?
There's quite a few. Our report relies on publicly accessible data, which we extensively link throughout the interactives that anyone can go online and see. One of our main data sources are corporate registries, and oftentimes these are state hosted corporate registries. Some states have really fantastic registries. They're well documented. They're not paywalled. A great example here is the UK corporate registries. We actually found a lot of valuable information in some Ecuadorian ones as well. Whereas on the other hand, there are some states where these registries either are non-existent, don't actually register information through search queries, or for another variety of reasons are not particularly useful for our data collection measures. So obviously, that sometimes skews our data set because we have more information on entities and jurisdictions where such data is more accessible.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What are some of the trends that really have you concerned about the coming years as we look toward the horizon and the long-term implications of spyware?
I think one trend that at present and looking ahead, I'm not sure, and I've spoken with my co-author Jen about this quite a bit. I'm not sure we see much indication of change is around this US-based investment. So despite all of this policy action, including visa restrictions, sanctions, executive orders coming out of the US, there's still clearly a disconnect between the American investment community and the American policy community on this issue. And so without any sort of meaningful movement on the needle there, I think that this is something that could continue to persist and potentially expand in scope.
Where do we stand with policymakers here in the U.S.? Is there any broad agreement on the place that spyware is intended to play?
With the new administration, it's actually still relatively early within the tenure of 4 years, and we haven't seen any public indications of change to the current status quo of the U.S. Policy perspective on these issues. But I think something to point out is that the absence of any change suggests at least that at minimum, the current trajectory, which has in the past included this effort through listing vendors on the entity list, issuing sanctions and visa restrictions, just given that these things have not necessarily been pulled back, is some sort of signal that this might continue, this sort of policy action might continue.
So, to what degree should regular people be concerned about this? For our listeners, is this high-level espionage kind of thing, or does it affect people in their day-to-day lives?
In terms of targeting with spyware, our report doesn't go into this in great detail, and I would really encourage listeners to go and check out some organizations that really give a lot of context and color to these sorts of targeted surveillance intrusions coming from organizations, like I mentioned, of Citizen Lab or Amnesty Tech. But that doesn't deny the fact that we all can take some personal steps in our personal digital footprint in securing that. What I think does matter, though, for most Americans is what I talked about with US investments. When we dig into this a bit more in detail, we actually found that a few different pension funds, for example, are invested in spyware companies. If I'm recalling correctly, I believe a pension fund out of New Jersey and Washington State are included in this. And while that might not be something that an everyday person is aware of, being able to have some context over where your finances are being invested into is certainly a first step in understanding what's going on and how entangled these sorts of ecosystems actually are.
Ben, what do you think?
I guess I just didn't have a great understanding of the spyware market and how it's a very dynamic market.
Yeah.
You have resellers and brokers playing a more critical role than anybody had previously understood. So it's harder to track relationships between the users and the specific vendors. And there are a lot of countries that have come into the market as well. So really interesting conversation.
Yeah, the big aha for me was the degree to which U.S. companies are investing in these spyware companies. And I would have thought that was prohibited, but Sarah set me straight. So that let me know that perception was an error. Evidently, it's a common perception, but it is indeed not the case.
So it wasn't just us being ignorant.
No. Lots of people are ignorant when it comes to this, evidently. It's a common misunderstanding. So I'm really glad that we had the conversation and she could set me straight and educate me. So again, thanks to Sarah Graham from the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative for joining us. The research is titled Mythical Beasts, Diving into the Depths of the Global Spyware Market, and we will have a link to that in the show notes. And now, a word from our sponsor, ThreatLocker, the powerful zero-trust enterprise solution that stops ransomware in its tracks. Allow Listing is a deny-by-default software that makes application control simple and fast. Ring fencing is an application containment strategy, ensuring apps can only access the files, registry keys, network resources, and other applications they truly need to function. Shut out cybercriminals with world-class endpoint protection from ThreatLocker. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening. Cyber Innovation Day is the premier event for cyber startups, researchers, and top VC firms building trust into tomorrow's digital world. Kick off the day with unfiltered insights and panels on securing tomorrow's technology. In the afternoon, the 8th annual Data Tribe Challenge takes center stage as elite startups pitch for exposure, acceleration, and funding. The Innovation Expo runs all day, connecting founders, investors, and researchers around breakthroughs in cybersecurity. It all happens November 4th in Washington, D.C. Discover the startups building the future of cyber. Learn more at cid.datatribe.com.